In this episode, we discuss what looks like an ongoing attempt by Donald Trump to big dog the American legal and electoral system. And in part two of our discussion, we consider whether human consciousness may be a byproduct of just a physics concept like entropy. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and riding shotgun with me today is a man who, when times are tough, is a big enough man to take one for the team. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to be our fall guy today? You know, if necessary.
I mean, if you're gonna make me, that wouldn't be my first choice. But you know, that's the role I need to play. I got to play. So
team player.
He's gonna fall over. Yeah.
Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, we ask that you subscribe, hit the subscribe or like button on your YouTube or your podcast platform. Doing that really helps the show out. Now, we're recording this on May 7th, 2024. And Tunde, we have two ongoing stories that I think really illustrate what's an interesting occurrence, what's happening, the ongoing occurrence that's happening, where Donald Trump is really trying to use the force of his personality to essentially just stay as, to dominate, stay as the dominating force over American institutions, with one being the legal system, the other being the electoral system. The first story, it goes into just yesterday, he was found in contempt of court for the 10th time by the judge in his hush money trial in New York. And essentially, the judge has a gag order in the case and is saying that you can't talk certain things about the jury or things like that, these aren't like unique things that have never happened before. Gag orders happen in times, or protective orders, things that you're not allowed to say, and for the purposes of allowing the legal system to run its course properly. And he's violating this, and it looks to be that he's violating it intentionally and almost daring the court to do something about it. To him, a $1,000 fine, which he's got hit with, is not the end of the world, and so he's daring the judge to escalate it. And the other was a recent, past few days, he said that when asked if he'll accept the election results, he says, well, if they're 100% honest, or, paraphrasing, if they're honest, then yes, but otherwise, no, he'll fight, which is an interesting thing for him to say, because in his mind, he's already also indicated that if he doesn't win, then there must be shenanigans. So he's essentially taking a position that as long as he wins,
it's a good setup, isn't it? It's like a win-win.
But we know not to think that he's just joking around, because the last time around he didn't accept him, and then 2016 he said he was calling him rigged already. So Tunde, I want to know just your thoughts on Trump kind of drawing the line in the sand. That I think these illustrate, as far as like, hey, the system is only legitimate when it works to serve me. Like whenever the system is bumping up against me or trying to constrain me, then I'm going to exert my will on the system instead, the American system.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much what the whole Constitution, especially the first few amendments, were written kind of to stop. So it's an interesting, on a serious note, even you setting up the way we're coming into this discussion today, just makes me realize how to continue to follow this path. One must really have to deal personally with some dissonance, because as you were saying this, we're joking here a little bit about, if the kind of attitude, if I don't win, it's illegitimate.
Yeah.
And if I win, it's legitimate.
Yeah.
And so
the only way to tell if it's legitimate or not is if I win.
And so, like you said accurately, that we have a precedent already set. What it reminds me of, James, is I can't help but think of something like the Chinese Communist Party, that this is becoming like a one-party rule type of environment. And a lot of Americans seem to be okay with the direction it's going. And I think that, to me, is just a fascinating thing, that in the last decade of us being Americans and just living, we've seen a large percentage, maybe not as many as half, but a large enough that it's, we're all here living together. We see it, of Americans who really are saying, yeah, I'm okay being part of a political party or apparatus, that really won't have any opponents if it go like the way I think. Because the
legitimacy,
idea of a
power is only
counterparty,
legitimately operated in the hands of one party.
correct. And to have a counterparty to play off of and have a debate and compromise, and the whole way the system was set up doesn't seem to be of interest to as many Americans today as I once thought. We all were kind of bought into this democracy, and whether you call it a democratic republic or a democracy, the idea that we all participate, we elect people to represent us in our government, and some represent certain ways of thinking and others represent other ways of thinking, but together they would come together and compromise. That doesn't seem to be welcome by a lot of people in our country at this point.
No. I mean, and it seems like people are kept in a heightened emotional state in order to justify that, so to speak. And I mean, I think you can date that back to the 90s, with, kind of the Republican Revolution. There was that. And then there was I specifically look at where I first started hearing that out loud was with Karl Rove in the first decade of the 21st century, when he would say, we want Republican rule for the next 40 years or something like that. And he would openly talk about that, it's one party that should be in charge and everything. But I'm just more fascinated by the way that Trump is. I mean, this is quite amazing, like the force of his personality and his relentlessness to essentially bend things to his will. And when you see it with the American, now I'm an attorney, so I mean, I'm seeing these things in with his trials that are kind of routine things and just basic things that aren't typically very controversial, and he uses them as opportunities to say, hey, I don't need to be confrontational here, but I want to be confrontational here in one sense because I want to make the people who are attempting to enforce an order on me, I want to make them sweat. I want to make them buckle. And then on the second hand, to make people who are behind me or who are supporting me, to make them constantly have to choose. And it really reminds me of, it's stuck with me, for years. I've brought it up many a times. The quote James Comey had, former director of the FBI, that Donald Trump eats your soul. And it really, because there's a progression involved here where, you follow him, on one step, and then you're good. And then you follow him. You got to follow him on the next step, and then eventually you follow them along so many steps that you do look up and say, "Hey, yeah, the legal system or the electoral system is the problem because it's standing in the way of Donald Trump getting what he wants." And it's like, so the idea that he picks a fight essentially with with the judge and with the court to say, okay, hey, you can't be out there trying to threaten witnesses, like things like that. Like, again, things that aren't in normal trials, aren't things that are, like controversial. Like, you can't do that. And it's like, okay, since you've told me I can't do that, I in fact want to do it more. What are you going to do? And so it's constantly this, what are you going to do? And that is how we can see how it affects his supporters, and how they continually go further and further in a bunker mentality. But it really puts a lot of pressure on the judge. And the judge is talking yesterday, I really don't want to have to put you in jail. The contempt of court is punishable by a $1,000 fine or 30 days in jail. And obviously one of those is a bigger stick than the other, particularly when you're talking to somebody who has a lot of money. And so, and he's like, oh, I really don't want to put you in jail. And you're a former president of the United States, you might be a future president of the United States. And it's like, well, if that was just some dude that was on trial and he was doing this stuff, that judge would have put him in jail a long time ago. So you can see the way that the pressure Donald Trump is putting on the judge and on the court, it is bending them. It's actually changing their behavior as it relates to him, which is what he wants. And so it's, in a sense, he's already won in this battle, and then we'll talk about kind of how this plays out on multiple iterations. But that, to me, is the fascinating part, is that he already has gotten to he's already bended the people who he's going against by constantly provoking them and picking fights with them and saying, what you gonna do? And then also he does that with the people that support him as well. So to me, just looking at it, as an observer is just amazing, because you typically look at these institutions, these American institutions, as being, old and powerful, strong, and so forth. And to see one man be able to bend it is amazing.
You got to let me in, because you said a lot, man. You've made some very good points, and that's why I don't want you to. I got to jump in just to keep the flow, because So a couple things. I mean, this is very interesting because number one is, in preparing for today, I just started looking at history. It's like, hey, what other moments in our history have paralleled this? And there are a few, primarily the 1920s and 30s, which we'll get into later in the discussion. So that was kind of the interesting thing, because there's a lot of similarities in certain things you're saying, and the way the system responded to some of those pressures that we had back then. So we'll get into that later. But you made a good point right here at the end of your section there, is when you said observe, that you observe certain things. And that's a backdoor way in for me to observe something that, I think we've all observed this, which is the information silos that people have settled in terms of their cable news, their social media feeds, the algorithms that feed them stuff, really have us as Americans literally observing two different realities. So when you and I,
really probably
I got
more
friends,
than two.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, I got friends and people I'm close with that really are all in on Donald Trump, and they only watch certain media, and they don't. So when I'm talking to them and we're having a conversation, I'm realizing we're on two different wavelengths, sets of facts. Obviously, I think my stuff is facts. They think their stuff is facts, right? And so we almost have seen in the last 8 years. And really, I'm glad you brought up Karl Rove in the 90s, because this energy has actually been there for a long time in our culture. So this isn't something Donald Trump started. He just kind of got, as you said it before, he got to the front of the parade.
Yeah, he saw the parade and jumped in front. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but what I'm saying is that what we really have to kind of accept here is that we live in a big country, but we now have two different cultures when it comes to how people look at politics. So that's the one thing that I think frustrates a lot of us, is that on all sides of the spectrum, is that when we talk to other people that we have in our life that are on the other culture politically, we seem to feel like we're talking to a foreign, person.
Well, we're talking to somebody who's in a different reality, like you said. Like their collection of facts that they find important don't really overlap with your collection of facts that you find important.
Well, and that's why I want to keep going, because that comes back to the observation. And then you say something when you started, which was very good, about when you talked about those Comey comments and all that, is the constantly have to choose. This goes back. I think, like, just to remember these things, the Access Hollywood tape was a great example.
Yeah.
Remember, back when you mentioned people like Karl Rove and George Bush, remember what conservatism, at least the rhetoric and the kind of way of being of the conservative Republican Party, was used terms like values voters. Remember that. Family and life. And George Bush, compassionate conservatism, right? Trying to put this softer face on the conservative brand. Then you got a guy out there who called I remember the lady that was the CEO of HP that was running for president in 2016, when he called her ugly on the stage. Who would want to vote for that face? Remember that?
Yeah.
Making fun of the disabled reporter, doing all that stuff. Then the Access Hollywood tape. So before even the election, there was already this beginning of forcing people psychologically, the distant, to have to make this choice. Like, I don't really like it. I'm a Christian conservative, evangelical. And he just said, I'm a celebrity. I get to grab him by the, what, and I got to put up with that. And that's when also this thing became, well, because Hillary's so bad, the other side's so bad that I just got to keep going with this. And then I think it fast forwards. Remember the inauguration, the crowd size.
Yeah.
It kept being these chips away. Remember, like you joked about it famously, the NOAA thing, the NOAA, meaning the hurricane when he drew with the Sharpie.
Well, remember, and so many of these things, and this to me is the fascinating piece, so many of these things are things that it's voluntary. It's not like it was forced on him. It's like he chose that fight in order to make people choose, and in order to put people within the institutions in the system on the defense. And let me, I'll say one thing real quick. The Access Hollywood piece, though, interestingly enough about that seemed that wasn't by choice, so to speak. But the way they dealt with that, remember, wasn't, it was we apologetic and so forth. It was like, so what? I think that might have been a lesson, kind of for them, oh, okay, hey, like maybe we don't have to take this typical tack, because politics up till that point would have been like, oh, when something like that happens, you go on an apology tour and you do all these things to try to make people feel okay. their approach was completely different. And that might have been, one of the key moments where they were like, hey, you know what? Actually, let's not go about this in the typical way. Let's lean in when something controversial happens, something that makes people choose happens. Let's lean in.
Yeah, no, and I want to get to the judge part because I think this all relates to it. I just want to say that you're right. I mean, this is a pretty interesting observation that we're having here because that started with him. And remember, the other elites in the parties, other big politicians and all that were all shocked. Oh my God, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And think about how it's permeated.
They were terrified.
But think about how it's permeated through the party to this point. We're here in, like you said, May 2024. The most recent kind of issue that in times past would have been like, oh my God, this is crazy, was when the governor of South Dakota, writes in her own book that she shot her 14-month-old dog and then a goat. And again, I've seen her recently in the last few days on TV, and it's this whole, now it's standing her ground. Now she's a victim of the liberal media and all this stuff. And it becomes where you're forced now to choose, where I think most Americans hearing that a politician shot their dog and their goat in the face just because of some random stuff. My attitude was kind of like, oh, well, maybe as a human being, you should have, either train the dog better or give it away or something. There's other ways to deal with things.
Well, what you're observing there, though,
it's forcing, though, some of the people on that political side to have to continue to distance themselves from the feelings they might naturally have had. Like, hold on, what do you mean you shot a dog?
Yeah. Well, think about it. What it is, it's following a new blueprint. And let me say this before you go to the comments on the judge. And then I do want to keep us moving. But, that's the new blueprint, basically, if you choose to go that direction. If you do something controversial, you do something that offends people, you lean into it. And then you then point at the media backlash and you force people to choose. And we see that has been effective in many respects, not 100%. It depends on who you are to some degree and the force of your personality. But that is a new part of the toolkit. The other thing I'll mention real quick, it just, and I know you want to get to the judge, but I want to just mention this piece is what we also have to acknowledge and recognize is that there is precedent in recent time for this. We've seen, and, it's been documented, the takeover by Donald Trump of the Republican Party, of the right-wing media ecosystem, and in many respects of the evangelical church, where you have like pastors and so forth coming out saying, hey, what are we doing? Why this stuff isn't Christianity? And other people saying, hey, the Jesus stuff is too old. It's too soft. Like, we have those debates going on, and the people who are saying this isn't Christianity are losing. Those people are the ones getting pushed to the fringes of evangelical Christianity. And so this approach, using the force of his personality and certain techniques has already been effective in taking over institutions that seemingly were self-propagating and weren't subject to a single person taking them over. So this isn't something that we're just talking about, oh, ha, 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 this is kind of funny. It is amazing to actually watch happen. But the threat that he poses, I mean, he has proven himself to be a very formidable person in terms of taking over institutions with the force of his personality and making these things all about him. So bringing it up isn't just for laughs and giggles and so forth. It's also to say, hey, he succeeded at this several times with other things.
Yeah, no, and I think as again, when we go into the historic part, this does have a lot of precedence. And just to finish off on the part with the judge and the system, I think you're absolutely right. He's obviously changed. He's won in a certain sense. And in another sense, he's just being another individual in the United States going through due process, which is the way the system's supposed to be. Now, I think that one interesting thing I find about someone like Donald Trump specifically is if you watch his behavior, he usually only behaves in this confrontational way when he doesn't have another way out, and will not behave in a confrontational way in other, situations. And so, when he might feel like, it's in his interest not to behave confrontational, I should say. So, for example, from everything, this is observing, right? From the stuff that I've observed in this recent week in this New York case, the information seems bad. And this is one thing I've noticed too, with a lot of the stuff about all of these legal cases involving him. The information isn't coming from that is making it appear that he may have guilt in certain areas and why he's even on trial for a lot of these things. I'm talking all
You're
the
saying,
cases.
like, for example, like the testimony and stuff like that, like people that are
testimony, the witnesses.
Yeah.
There are people coming from his side.
Yeah.
Meaning, on this New York case, it was David Pecker, his friend, who was the CEO of the National Enquirer. This started with his CFO, Alan Weisselberg, all this stuff. Remember, his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, already was in jail for 2.5 years for pleading guilty to this stuff. So this trial is really just to uncover the facts of why Michael Cohen did this stuff, which he's already been in jail for. Yeah. Then you've got Hope Hicks, his assistant, who was just on trial. You got Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, which are his ex-girlfriends. They're from his circle. I'm thinking of even things like the Georgia election thing is his voice on tape saying, find me the 11,800 votes.
Yeah, these aren't, he tends to frame these things as partisan, but these aren't, the people that are saying, like,
these are all, all those, there's fake elector cases with this guy Chisbro and all that. This all comes from Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, Chisbro, his lawyer, John Eastman, his lawyer. These are all people that were in his circle. So when I'm observing, unlike some of my close friends I talk to, I'm looking and saying, well, how can this be that much of a witch hunt when these are all people that were in his inner circle just saying what was happening? And so what I'm saying here is when I see him constantly picking at the judge and now being held in contempt 10 times, my attitude is just like I felt with the Supreme Court. Yeah, I see a two-tier justice system, but he's getting away with a lot more than regular people like me and you would. You and I wouldn't have the Supreme Court stopping everything they're doing in their busy schedule and deciding if you or I have immunity from crimes. We don't get that luxury. We don't get the luxury of a special master to slow down an investigation if I walked out of my office with classified information and then refuse to give it back. That's the thing that a lot of people supporting that one, him on that one, don't acknowledge, that Mike Pence, Joe Biden, Mike Pompeo, all these guys that
everybody else
gave it back.
Everybody else gave it back right away.
And so again, he wanted to force a confrontation with the Justice Department on the classified documents because he knew he shouldn't have taken them in the first place. So this is another attempt, and this is why he's very effective, as you're saying. It's working very well, where because he doesn't have a legal defense for most of the stuff he's in trouble for, he becomes now a political martyr, a messianic figure, and it's working. A lot of people are saying, well, this is unfair and all that. And I think adjacent to that, and then I'll shut up here, is we've had a demonizing of the other side for a generation. So there's a lot of Americans that just immediately think, okay, I can't even look at a Democrat or anyone other than this, what I've been comfortable with, because it'll be the end of the country if I do. So I guess I know there's something uncomfortable with what I'm following here, but I just got to stay in this lane. And I think it's a combination of all these different forces.
Well, and then, once you get people going down a certain path, confirmation bias and certain cognitive biases, in addition, beyond that, make it easier to continue going along that path. And so that aspect is being taken advantage of as well. Now, my question for you, in looking at this, all right, so we talk about observing, like this effort to exert your personality and the force of your personality over these institutions and over these systems, and, essentially cast it so that if the system gives me what I want, the system is okay. And if the system does not give me what I want, then there's something wrong with the system. The system's illegitimate, which, if you boil that down, basically what you're saying is that I am the only authority. If the system either serves me as the authority or the system is illegitimate if it doesn't serve me. So when you have something like a brazen attempt like that to go on, and again, we've seen this with an institution like the Republican Party. We've seen this with an institution or with institutions and organizations in the right-wing media. Like the right-wing media, they're not a variety of opinions by and large of Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump is centered, and then people can disagree and agree about what Ted Cruz or J.D. Vance. They can have different opinions on those, but everybody has to have the same opinion on Donald Trump. And then again, even starting to see in the evangelical church, what do people who want to maintain? What are there lessons we can learn from that they didn't do with the RNC or just throughout history? What kind of things people who want to maintain, the American system, the constitutional system, rule of law, and all that stuff. what types of things, like should they be doing or should they be avoiding, do you think, to avoid this kind of takeover of the American system?
I mean, what should they do if they want to avoid it? I mean, don't let him get on the ascend to the throne, because I think that
they're not letting him. The whole point is that nobody's letting him. He's taking it by force.
No, I know. And that's my point.
Is saying this is mine. So
no, look, when I think for me the very symbolic thing was the takeover of the RNC and installing his daughter-in-law Laura Trump as the main figurehead. I know she's the co-chair.
But that's a culmination more than an actual, like that. By the time that happened, it was already over. The takeover's already done.
But that's what I mean. It's a symbolic kind of like the nail in the coffin that this is over. Now it is Donald Trump's party. And the reason I say that is a couple of reasons. One is one of the things, again, from me observing from the outside, of why Donald Trump had finally run afoul of Ronna McDaniel was because she refused to end the primary while Nikki Haley was still running as an active kind of, campaigning and still actively in the primary. She hadn't stepped down yet. And Ronna McDaniel was still trying to hold on to what we're talking about here. The fact that this is the Republican Party. It's a political party that's assembled by a lot of people, and it's here to represent a certain ideology about the country and how we see
the primary system works.
Yeah, and this is
what we've been doing.
Yeah,
for this
we had
whole time.
Multiple people running for president, and former President Trump, you're one of them. You're in the lead. Not only, and that's the thing about Donald Trump, right? He clearly was an outsized lead with Nikki Haley, and she had no chance of even coming on his heels to get this thing. But like you're saying about forcing a confrontation, that wasn't enough. He couldn't. He just wanted to say, "End it for me, because this is mine." And so, I mean, that's really a king or a dictator at that point with that kind of attitude. So that was one of the things that he said, no, then when this primary is over, you're going to step down. And what did he do? He installed his daughter-in-law. What did she say when she started doing the interviews on Fox and all this stuff? I was observing it. She said the number one goal of the RNC is going to be to elect Donald Trump. And that was while the primary is still on. So again, if I was running for president in the Republican Party, I'd be like, what do you mean that's the job? The job should be to support all of us, and the best one wins. And so that's, again, one symbolism. The second symbolism, James, is, again, these are the facts that don't permeate, unfortunately, into the conservative media ecosystem. Right now, the RNC, for example, has 0 field offices in the United States. The DNC has around 500. And that's what I think when you see this one person take something over like this just to do it for themselves, that's my concern for the Republican Party is there's not money going to the congressional races, kind of the down ticket, the real infrastructure of the party. I mean, 0 field offices mean they're not going to have people knocking on doors, putting out signs, all that. So what you really have is, that's why I say this is symbolic. It's the collapse of the party. It's really a collapse of the Republican Party that is not like a party apparatus.
That's the national.
Yeah,
the
that's
national
what I mean.
is just all about serving the one man. You still have
Correct.
regional.
It's not like if you and I were running for Congress down here in South Florida as a Republican, we would have a much different relationship with the RNC than congressional candidates in the past. We'd be scrambling with the Florida Republican Party and trying to raise money certain ways, but we couldn't go to the big dog
party or county office and so forth.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So yeah, I would assume that if he gets back into the presidency, he's going to try and do the same thing with the federal government, which the 2025 project from the Heritage Foundation, all that. Like these people are telling us, and he's told us in his Time Magazine interview recently, what they're planning on doing. And yeah, he's going to try and bend this system to be his and to have some sort of American one-party dictator type of rule. That's why I say it reminds me of the Chinese Communist Party. And it's interesting that a lot of Americans want this. That's to me the more. Yeah. I'm not surprised by him. I'm surprised by a lot of my fellow Americans that are kind of running into this.
Well, yeah, that's actually one of the interesting things about it is that you get why, any person who understands, like you don't have to be selfish, but if you understand selfish impulses, you would understand why he's doing what he's doing. Yeah, but it is hard to see.
Yeah, I don't want to go to jail at 77.
What the people who are signing up for this are getting out of it. But some of it is, and this is something he's good at, is kind of making people feel emotionally connected either to his rise or emotionally disdain for the rise or the success of someone else. And so that he's tied all that together is, skillfully, I would say, has been something that he has set it up to where his supporters feel good when he does well, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, so they're getting out of it. He gets the success, and they get to feel good because he got success. So it's a symbiotic
you're
relationship.
Right. It's a very good observation because he's a very unique and talented in this way. I mean, he can bring a lot of these cross currents kind of together for people. So to your point,
well, but
that's one thing.
Let's keep moving because I want to get to the piece on what people can do about this. And to me, it's really interesting. I think the contempt of court case, in terms of what the judge, for example, right now in the hush money case and in the New York City or New York case, he represents essentially the system. Literally, he represents the system. He is the court, and that's the rule of law, the legal system, and it's his courtroom, and he says what goes and what doesn't go, and so forth. And contempt of court is typically considered a serious penalty, a serious threat. It has become not a serious threat for Trump. He is intentionally going into or getting held, or doing things that will give him cause to be held in contempt of court, and daring the judge to do something about it, basically. And these fines are escalating. The question is, I think reasonable minds can disagree on this, should the judge escalate? Should the judge say, okay, well, I'm allowed to give you up to 30 days in jail. I'm going to give you a day in jail, or I'm going to give you 2 days in jail. I'm going to give you a week in jail, or I'll give you, whatever it is. Should the bet that Trump is making is that, one, that the judge won't do it, or if he does, his people will be so outraged that they'll be even more drawn to him. Like, it'll be another decision point for his people, and it'll be like, oh, I'm going to go give Trump more money now because of this. Because, setting aside the fact that he was held in contempt of court for things that he intentionally did, they just can't do this to Trump. And so I'm of the opinion that in the face of this kind of dare, though, that the court has no choice, that the court has two choices, essentially. And I don't think one of them is not a legitimate choice. One is to just allow Trump to have the floor and say, okay, no, you can do whatever you want to do. I will not use the tools at my disposal under the rule of law to stop you from doing things I tell you not to do. The other is to continue to escalate the penalties. And that would include going into jail time. So I think the judge has no choice. And you have to deal with whatever blowback is coming. The blowback is going to come no matter what. But if you don't enforce the rules, then what you do is establish a different precedent that the rules don't have to be followed as long as you are willing to kick and scream enough about somebody trying to put the rules on to you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I come down on the other side of that one just because, I mean, you make a good point that the rules maybe kind of feel like they're being bent a bit. But I do think the kind of nuance can be seen here that the judge has discretion, because remember, he is fining Donald Trump $1,000, the maximum per occurrence. So there is some sort of penalty being applied. And also the fact that, look, Donald Trump is going through due process, right? He's showing up to court every day. There's a jury, there's witnesses. So in the end, Donald Trump is conforming to the system in that way. My concern with jailing Trump over this, not if he's convicted of one of these crimes or something, including all of them, not just in the New York case. I'm just saying that convicting him, not convicting, but jailing him for something like that, even just for a day or two. Again, I think this is exactly why he wants the confrontation. I think this was supposed to be the most, the least of all the cases that was the most interesting. And now with all this evidence in the last week and these people testifying, it sounds pretty interesting. And so I think that there's no good news for Donald Trump right now, unfortunately for him. So what he could do is force the judge to put him in jail, and that would create a certain martyrdom and sympathy. And then he would have all the ecosystems like Fox News and all this stuff talking about what a victim he is. And you're right. He would galvanize.
But he already has that, though. Like that's not a change.
I just think that if he is allowed to just be in the spotlight without the system seeing more encroaching, I mean, obviously the system's already on him. I just think that there'll continue to be small percentage of Americans that kind of just see him there standing with all this information that'll some of it'll permeate through some of their ecosystems, and they won't have that contrast to say, remember, it's the other side. it's the Biden crime family, it's the DOJ under the deep state and all that stuff, which will come right back into the fold in the event that he's put in jail. So that's why for me.
And here's where I disagree with that. I think that stuff's already happening anyway. Like none of this stuff, like all of the things you're worried about happening are already happening. And so to me, if you say, well, Trump is doing this because he wants you to put him in jail so that that'll fire up his people even more. To me, that is essentially you playing into his hands. I think it's the opposite. He's doing this because he wants to get you to bow down. He wants to get you to say, okay, I don't want to do it. This is what you're talking about is the same calculation that Merrick Garland made when he dragged his feet for years on whether or not, the tape, like all the election interference stuff, that stuff, all those facts were developed back in 2000, 2001. Why did Jack Smith just start going after this stuff, 2022, 2023? Like, it's because Merrick Garland was doing the same calculation that you're doing. Like, oh, well, if we try to enforce the law against this guy, they're going to go kicking and screaming. And then all the people are going to be so upset about that. Well, guess what? They're going to do that. That's what's going to happen. Sometimes, if you're going to stand on principle, sometimes you have to do things that are going to make you uncomfortable. Even though they make you uncomfortable. Donald Trump's game is to make you uncomfortable so you won't stand on principle. So you'll make exceptions because it's like going this direction makes me too uncomfortable because of what I'm going to have to deal with. That's the point. That's what he's trying to do to the judge personally when he's talking about the judge's daughter and he's talking about the judge, his family and so forth. He's trying to make the judge uncomfortable so the judge won't stand on principle. And so I can understand where you're coming from, but what I'm saying is that I just think that the things you're worried about are happening and are going to happen either way. And so those can't be a reason to not stand on the principle of, okay, well, if you continue, and again, I don't think they should have started with jail. Like, after 10 times, maybe after 12 times, but at a certain point, you have to escalate the penalties. You can't continue to do the same thing.
On this one, I just see specifically this one, not other stuff that the law is dealing with, but specifically this issue. I just think that it would give him personally too much. I think he doesn't like the position he's in. I think he doesn't like going to the court every day. I think he's tired of it. I think he doesn't like that the facts aren't in his favor when the more that these witnesses that are from his internal side come out with. And so I do think that this would be one, because here's what I also think. Like most people that are kind of yellers and screamers, after a while, it kind of wears off and people stop hearing it as much. And that's what I think. Like
you're still waiting on that.
No, what I'm saying is when in 2017, 2018, when Trump was on Twitter and all that, and he's screaming at people and all that, I think it was like more new, right? It was a newer thing. Like, oh my God. Now when he's doing what is technically is contempt of court and posting on Truth Social, which, barely has a couple 100,000 people on it type of thing. What I'm saying is he's like a crazy man shaking his fist at the sky at this point. So that's kind of what I'm saying is specifically this one. I feel like if they were to jail him for a day or two, that gives him his crazy looking self some sort of legitimacy. I'd rather they let him keep blowing in the wind, let him keep selling sneakers and Bibles and crying for money to billionaires, and having these fundraisers and making it appear that he's just what he is. He's a fish flapping on land and just grabbing at straws. If they put him in jail for a night or two, all of a sudden it's back to, the big bad system and the victim. And I just think that,
but again,
that would give people something to focus on.
Now? That's happening now. It's still the big bad system.
I just think they will have more to focus on than
the contempt of court. Did you read the statement after the 10th contempt of court? Oh, this is just, Joe Biden and partisan. And that's what they're saying now about the fines. Like they're saying the same stuff. So, but I mean, I think, we've had that discussion. So, I mean, I don't want to beat the dead horse, but, and again, I can understand why you think, and I think you understand, we both understand why the other person's coming down where they do, but it's just it is a matter where reasonable minds can disagree. It really is a matter of, I think, where you prioritize playing or where you think is playing into the hands of the person that's trying to buck the system, and that's kind of, do you think you're playing into their hand by by making a hard line and saying, I'm not going to continue to let you, take over the system, or it's like, hey, I don't want to draw more attention to this than I think I need to. So I'm going to bend a little bit to try to keep the peace, if I think I can still keep the peace, so to speak. So, but it's a difficult question, is what I think that illustrates. And so we're going to see how, like the judge, this was number 10. There's going to be a number 11 and then a number 12. And so we'll see how the
Let's
judge
say this: if he puts him in jail, we'll do another show on it. Then we can follow up with how the public is reacting.
But we know how the public's going to react. Again, I think sometimes you have to do things, even though if you know that the reaction is not going to be exactly what you want. Sometimes you got to do it, and so the public reaction wasn't great when, it fill in the blank. But if that's what the law calls for or whatever, then you got to do it sometimes, or else you risk making the system being about the whims of people instead of about the rule of the law. So, but I think we can wrap from there. Thanks for joining us on part 1 of this discussion. Part 2 of this week's discussion will be coming up. So please be sure to check that out as well.